Om Shtapakaya Chatarmasya Sarvatarma Swarupine Avatar Varishtaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha. Om Namah Shri Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya Namo Namaha. Om Namah Shri Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya Namo Namaha. Om Namah Shri Bhagavate Ramakrishnaya Namo Namaha. Our salutations to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa, who is the establisher of the truths of all religions, who is the essence of all dharmas in this age, who represents the best of all avataric descent. To that one, the Kali Avatar, we pay our profound salutations. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us and may peace be unto all. Om Hari Om, Hari Om, Hari Om Tat Sat. You have joined us here on our Satsang morning on Sunday here on the big island of Hawaii. We have not appeared in Satsang in Hawaii for about a month because of the Dharma visit that I just returned from to the two ashrams in San Francisco and in Portland, Oregon, where we studied and finished the last part of the Svetashvatara Upanishad in Portland, and we'll be starting up with study of the Taittiriya Upanishad next. So it is a very profound time with profuse teachings, and we want to take the teachings we get in class and have some sort of concourse with the seers and the sages and the living gurus called darshan or satsang, where you get a chance to take those teachings and ask questions. And in this live streaming format, we welcome the live streaming audience here into our Honoka'a ashram overlooking the Pacific Ocean. We call it the Ganga Pacifica. And we're surrounded on all sides by this sacred water, which we choose to see as sacred, to see as a living ocean of consciousness, a metaphor for the living ocean of consciousness that's within us and also all around us. So we welcome you here and have received questions from some of the students, which for SRV associations are very far flung. We have students in India, we have students in Europe, we have students on the East Coast and West Coast, and then here in Hawaii, and a few other little parts of the world too, Romania, and I can think of a few individuals that are probably watching or paying attention around the world to our live streaming broadcasts and to the books and commentaries and yoga classes, Patanjali yoga classes through the email, and even beings who are inmates in prisons are beginning to receive classes from SRV. I've been receiving them for the last 10 years or so, and are beginning to come out of that state and out into the world and begin to continue their interest in the Vedanta, pick up the string of their yoga, as Sri Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, which we do from lifetime to lifetime, as you know. And the idea of reincarnation, lifetimes based on karma, is one that's accepted in India, has been accepted from time out of mind, really. It's relativity, no doubt, because the soul can never really be reborn. It's never born, it never lives, and it never dies. It's eternally living. That is, it has no origins. We just studied that up the Columbia River Gorge about 3 weeks ago in our retreat on Gaudapada's Karika on the Mandukya Upanishad. He talking in terms of non-origination, or ajativada, the path of those who know that the soul is never born and never lives in a relative sense and never passes away, that birth, life, and death and then all hopes and fears are a thirst for life that the soul has, to sort of paraphrase Swami Vivekananda's Song of the Sannyasana, a thirst for life that it has to quench. And satiation never comes, as my teacher says, as long as you don't take to the Dharma teachings and find your way from lower knowledge to higher knowledge. So I just mentioned subjects that are in 2 or 3 of the questions here that I have gotten to read about 15 minutes before we came on the air. We had an hour meditation first at 6 a.m. here, and then we start our live streaming here at 7:15. And so this first question then from a student in Oregon has to do with lower knowledge and higher knowledge. He asks, why is the obtainment of lower knowledge considered a prerequisite for the obtainment of higher knowledge? Well, there is that chant, Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya, Tamaso Ma Joytir Gamaya, Mrityur Ma Amritam Gamaya, Abira Mayeti, Rudrayate Dakshinam Mukam, and so forth, which really means lead us from darkness to light, and from lower knowledge to higher knowledge, and from the illusion of birth, illusion of death to eternal life. So right in that quote we have the subjects of these introductions that I've just been giving there for us to study and talk about. So the question comes in, why is lower knowledge a requisite for higher knowledge? It's usually the case for most beings that they're going to have to proceed from lower knowledge to higher knowledge. That is, by taking teachings in college, at school levels and so forth, university and high school, that we come up through, that the soul has a chance to study the various secular topics of the world so that it can find out that the world is unreal. Not the answer most people are expecting, I'm sure. By studying the world as an apparent reality, one understands that it is relative and constantly changing. And that's what lower knowledge really is for. Your actions actually are to bring you to a state of knowledge, lower knowledge. That's why you act, is to accrue some sort of knowledge that's going to bolster you up. But then that lower knowledge is best used for examining the world from the standpoint of the non-dual self and seeing through it. That is, through the appearances of things. Because if you, say, go from physics to quantum physics, and then from quantum physics you realize that everything is based on particles that are changing at a billionth of a second, and then that's the ingredient in your apparent reality, then you begin to question the reality itself. You begin to think of it, maybe it's rather illusory, or maybe it's ephemeral, or definitely it's transitory. And then you hear Christ saying, you cannot build your house on shifting sand, and it seems like this universe is made of shifting sand of particles, all changing. So that would be one way in which you would study a secular topic. And if you were an inward moving yogi, that is a being who wants to get to the source and origin of things, you're searching for answers, as any good scientist should, then you're going to want to go from this lower truth to medium truth, and from a medium truth to higher truth. And so any secular subject will point you in that direction. Any object will point you in that direction. The object is just a manifestation of your own knowledge. It has come out from the pancha process, fives. You have 5 fingers. Everything's in terms of fives. So it come rolling out in terms of fives all the way out to the 5 elements of ether, air, fire, water, and earth. So in that process of rolling out, or trickling down, we say, from highest consciousness into form, and from form into denser form, you find that it is just knowledge on the march. From its highest or non-dual place, it breaks into a form, like an ocean breaking into waves. And then those waves, which are vibrations, begin to fashion the worlds of name and form, and inside of those worlds are fashioned these objects. So Holy Mother, Sri Sharda Devi, our great ideal here in the SRV associations and Ramakrishna order, the mother of the order, has said that all objects are just the knowledge made manifest, or all objects are thought concretized, she said sometimes. So if you begin to get that kind of understanding from lower knowledge, then you will start to look at the object in a different way, start to look at the worlds in different ways, and maybe, hopefully, you'll start to look at yourself and others in a different way. In other words, you're not just a physical being anymore, but you have a subtle body, a dream body, and you have a causal body, and in this way you can then turn and march from lower truth to higher truth, and from the illusion of birth and death to eternal life. You can make this inward journey. So in that way, lower knowledge is a prerequisite for higher knowledge for the greater percentage of beings in this world. But I must make a justification to that statement, is that there are beings who come here who are already invested with, imbued with higher knowledge. That is, even non-dual knowledge. Higher knowledge might be even a little different than non-dual knowledge. Non-dual knowledge is sort of a misnomer as a term, really. It's really more a state of mind, or as the Buddhists would say, of no mind, where all objects disappear and all thoughts also with it. Savitarka, nirvitarka, savichara, nirvichara, how you have samadhi with objects first, and then you have correlative samadhi without objects. You have a samadhi with thoughts, and then you have a correlative samadhi without thought. So you're always dissolving all of this back inside of you, and then reprojecting it, and then dissolving it, and so forth. So in that way, then, this lower truth to higher truth march is not necessary for seers and sages, avatars like we just chanted to Sri Ramakrishna Paramahamsa before I started. They already have this knowledge in full within themselves. Kingdoms of heaven are within you. All knowledge lies within you, the father of yoga said. So in that case, then, they would manifest a body out of that knowledge and then take it back and manifest it again. As Sri Krishna says in the Gita, like a child putting on sets of clothes and outgrowing them and getting new clothes. Bodies are like that to them. They're bodies of knowledge, whether they're a physical body or not, because they've all come from knowledge. So that has to be said in conjunction with this idea that people are making this march from lower to higher, from lower to middling to higher. It's really a sort of dream march, because that knowledge is in everyone. It is the essence of everything. Buddha, intelligence means buddhi or Buddha. It's the very foundation for everything. It's the chit in Sat Chitananda, pure existence, pure knowledge, and pure bliss. It's a beautiful name for absolute reality, or Brahman, or Allah, or Almighty Father. So that they manifest themselves out of that non-dual state using knowledge. Now, but for the ordinary person, you might say, the person who has forgotten their self, because you can never lose the self or become damned or become, an eternal sinner or something, eternally damned. In our tradition, it's that they've simply forgotten. That's the only real sin in Vedanta, is that you've forgotten the true nature of yourself as being pure and perfect, like your father is pure and perfect. Or in this case, with Sri Ramakrishna, your mother, Kali, is pure and perfect. So whatever names you assign to divine reality, that is the highest state, deepest state, non-dual state, and everything burgeons forth out of that, and then it just gets taken back in. And that's called the evolution and involution process. Everything comes in sets of dualities, so if you have evolution, you must also have an involution. And that's where our physical science begins to end, as far as theories like the Big Bang and so forth. There has to be this initial force, but then it everything goes in a cyclic motion, even in time, and everything goes in a cyclic motion in periods, yugas they're called. So we always look for this return. But that's the point with lower knowledge and higher knowledge, is that these souls that are past masters, you could call them, are always in the state of that non-dual wisdom. So they're not going from lower knowledge to higher knowledge. If it looks like they are, then that's for your benefit. They're taking on the limitation. In Tantra, that's called the kanchuka. And they're taking on the limitation on purpose and coming down through the various cosmic laws of time and space into the body, through the Prerequisite, in the soul, into the body. And they're taking these on purpose. And so it may appear to you that they are going through the evolution process, but their consciousness is always centered in that non-dual state, sort of like the octopus's body and then its various arms feeling around, you see. The soul is sort of like that, stays in one place, but it sends out feelers, and those are called bodies in different lokas or different worlds. So without getting too far afield from that, that's a sort of quick explanation of how a being marches from lower truth to higher truth. Asato ma sat gamoya tamaso ma gamoya, from darkness to light. And when Vivekananda came amongst us here in the West in the late 1800s, he gave that translation to it. It's not from falsehood to truth that a soul passes. It's from lower knowledge to higher knowledge. So lower knowledge, that is aparavidya, has to be figured in or factored in to the quotient of spiritual life. And in fact, if a person wants to go in our order, Ramakrishna order, and renounce the world and become a monk, then nowadays usually they say, well, finish your education first and then renounce the world, because they want you to finish up your issues with lower knowledge, you see. And then you'll also be a better guide for beings who are still in that process of going from lower truth to higher truth. If you are both a monastic or a swami in this case, and you also have knowledge of science and phonetics and various things. Phonetics, for instance, languages, and they're very, very important in India to study the scriptures. It's extremely important to know that, to get the right interpretations and to be able to guide people in understanding the revealed scriptures particularly. So there is some answer to that question about lower truth to higher truth. Now this next one is from actually a relative of mine who is also an initiate of SRV many years ago, and last I heard from him he was on Maui, and so if you're watching, I'll answer your question here and sending you aloha from the Big Island to Maui, which we can see right out the window here. And we send you that aloha and take your question, which says, I am confused about defining the ego. My working definition of ego is the diluted conception of self as the body-mind, and the associated beliefs and judgments. I would guess that this resides in the Manomaya Kosha. You have spoken of the ego which abides in the Anandamaya Kosha, which I would guess is the ripe or mature ego. How, in a nutshell, does one transform the first into the second? Well, the teaching of fives, again, is very important. Everything goes in a five-fold process. So from the Anandamaya Kosha, this is the sheath of ego, then out of that comes the intellectual sheath, and that's Vijnanamaya Kosha, then the Manomaya Kosha of the mind, then the Pranamaya Kosha of the life force energy, and finally furthest out is the Annamaya Kosha, the sheath of food, or the physical world. These are your five bodies, actually, as far as that system of Vedanta, which is discussed in the Taittiriya Upanishad in depth. The Adara system, sometimes it's called. Very important to Vedanta to know that you have five bodies, 5 selves, as it were. These are not just your individual bodies, but these are collective and cosmic bodies too. The physical world is not just you, for instance. The Annamaya Kosha is all those other bodies out there, and all other bodies consuming food. Anna means food. Everything eats. Food is very, very important then at that level. And that's why we have to bless it and make sure that it's pure when we take it in, so that pure food ends in pure blood, and pure blood then leads to pure thoughts, and pure thoughts leads to the pure Brahman, realization of the self, the non-dual self. So with that as a sort of introduction, and taking the question more specifically, those sheaths then have to be dissolved back into one another. I was just talking about evolution and involution. So the spiritually inclined person wants to dissolve these back into each other. So you would dissolve the Annamaya Kosha back into the Pranamaya Kosha, just like you would dissolve earth back into water. You see the connection. Earth and food and water and prana flowing, you see. And then just like you would then dissolve those two back into the Manomaya Kosha, just like you would then dissolve earth and water back into fire. And then those 3 back into the Vijnanamaya Kosha, back in, like you would dissolve water, earth, water, and fire back into air. And finally, all 4 of them back into ether, or the Anandamaya Kosha. So the ego really is this widespread being. Now, so therefore, the body is pervaded by prana, and the body and prana are pervaded by mind. And mind, body, and prana are pervaded by intelligence. And intelligence, mind, prana, and body are pervaded by the ego. And all of those are pervaded by Brahman. And nothing pervades Brahman. It is the pervader. It's all pervasive. So that's how the Taittiriya Upanishad explains it. And so then if you go specific to the Anandamaya Kosha here, then you might want to clarify your thinking about that. The question says, I guess, that this resides in the Manomaya Kosha, that the ego resides in the Manomaya Kosha, but the scriptures say that the Manomaya Kosha actually is residing within the intellect, and those 2 are residing then back inside of the ego. So the ego is going to be the pervader of all the 5 sheaths. It's going to be the subtlest. And so it's not incorrect here to say that you guess that the ego is the riper, mature ego. The Anandamaya Kosha is the riper, mature ego. Because yes, there are elements of every sheath in every other sheath. That is, there's definitely some ego in our food sheath, isn't there? That's my food. No, that's my food. Is the kind of idea. Or and so there are elements. It's not so cut and dried as just to say we can make these 5 divisions, you see, and put borders between them, you see, like lines of demarcation, but rather that they all are connected to one another. And so it's the connection that we really want to look at, not the separation. Separation is just for terms of study, but the connection is going to give you that comprehensive viewpoint. So in that way then you could say Anandamaya Kosha pervades the Manomaya Kosha. That is, ego pervades the intellect and mind, and it's there as a sense of I and everything. The question being, the working definition of ego is the diluted concept of self as the body-mind. That's called, it's one of the first evolutes of Maya, and it means that you've taken the self to be the body, or the body to be the self. Either way you put that, it's about the same thing. So that's a diluted sense, right? But the way that it might be better thought of, in as far as the meditator is concerned, because the ego has all these beliefs and judgments that it that it's foisting on the mind. The intellect wants to decide those and settle them so that the ego can be ripe and mature. See, so this is how everything gets dissolved back in, like earth to fire, earth to water, and water to fire, and fire to ether, air, and air to ether. Just like that, you want to dissolve each of these koshas back into the next subtler kosha. Kosha means covering. So as you dissolve one back into the other, you've got one less covering over the self. You dissolve the next two back into the third, you have three less coverings over the self. So as you're moving inward like this, the self is becoming revealed as not being food, as not being life force, as not being mind, not being intelligence that's limited just to lower knowledge. But it's heading towards higher knowledge. From lower knowledge to higher knowledge we move. Till finally the ego is there and it pervades everything else, but so it is full, you see, like that. But then it has its own limitation, doesn't it? Even when it's ripe, it has a limitation. So the ego sheath is going to have to turn to make some grand and unusual movement in itself and turn and give itself up to the higher self. From lower self to higher self is just like from lower knowledge to higher knowledge. So that's called self-surrender in the bhakti path. Or it's called dissolving the mind stream in the meditative path. Or it's called neti neti to iti iti in the jnana yoga path. Whichever path or yoga you're practicing predominantly, you should be practicing all of them in my estimation, but whichever one you're focusing on at any given time, you're going to want to be doing this dissolution. And so if you're talking about the five sheaths, when everything has been brought back into ego, and doesn't it make sense because the self is here in everything, not just the great self, that's not actually in everything, it's behind everything, but the ego is in everything, it's gotten mixed with everything. So if you can draw everything back into it, you're drawing everything back to the original inception that a decision you made to take on an individual self. That really gets to the crux of the matter there. It's the decision you made to separate yourself out from Brahman. You all of a sudden got a jar and you went to the ocean and you took a jar full of water and you capped it off and you set it somewhere and said, that's me. You see, I'm that jar of water sitting next to the ocean. And there's this glass-like barrier that's keeping you from being your true self. You've got this limited jar of water and then the whole ocean sitting next to it. So that's rather like the ego, and when it realizes that it's been contained like that, then it turns to ripe ego and it begins to give itself by increments back to the ocean. Or maybe all at once, you just decide to grab the ego, stick it under water, take a rock, break it, and water becomes water, one with water, you see. The small self becomes one with the great self, which it always was, but the ego had caused this slight barrier. So the point there is that ripe ego really would be that ego that sees through the limitation, the self-limitation, the kanchuka of that primal error, sometimes they call it, of considering the body, mind, mechanism to be the self, especially the body. A case could be made for the mind that if it's the great mind or original mind or no mind, then that of course is one with Brahman, as Sri Ramakrishna used to say. So a good few minutes here spent on the five sheaths. Thank you for the questions so that we can always remind ourselves of this key Vedantic theory and teaching, probably more than a theory, a sort of statement of fact about Maya. And that leads to the next question too. How can the influence of Maya be detected in life decisions? How can the influence of Maya be detected in life decisions? Well, remember another five. Maya is name, form, time, space, and causality. That's the definition Vivekananda has given us, a very full definition of Maya, rather than just saying it's illusion, like mirage in a desert. water in a mirage, you see. That's not going to be a very full definition of Maya. When you say name, form, time, space, and causality, then you're grouping together a whole lot of cosmic principles with name and form. And all of a sudden you know how pervasive Maya itself is, how widespread Maya is. So really it really depends on what definition first you give the word Maya. I think the question here is speaking from the standpoint of confusion. Maya as confusion. When people say Maya, that's what they usually mean. They don't know that there's Mahamaya, there's a great Maya, the great enchantress that runs the whole show. And then there's all these different levels of Maya, like the Spanda of Maya in Shaivism, which is very close to Divine Mother, and which transcends time, its phases, the cosmic laws, and other, actually 5 cosmic laws that, now that I'm counting them in my mind, called spandas, or vibrational spheres. So you have to, if you answer the question from the standpoint of Maya equals confusion, then that's probably where this is coming from, because life decisions are very difficult to make. So you might rather say, how can the influence of Maya be detected in life decisions? You might want to change that to say that Maya is in every life decision you make. Maya is just the sleight of hand. You want to make a decision, but Maya's got her hand over your eyes. But her other hand, she's leading you on. See, that's one of the definitions of Maya in the Tantras. Maya is the one who covers your eyes with one hand and leads you on with the other. So your life decisions are rather like that. You can't really make a decision without Maya, is what I'm saying. Life is Maya. It's the name and form. We just defined it. Isn't life name and form? Can you have life without name and form? Can you have life without time and space? Maybe eternal life, yes, but not this relative life that depends on the 5 sheaths and lower knowledge and processes and progress, transformations. All of that happy stuff is Maya. So you would probably rather say then, I need to see through the Maya as best as I can and make my life decisions based upon my higher decisions. So therefore you're going to want to sharpen your intellect and that kosha, that sheath called the intellect, and ripen that sheath called the ego, and clear that sheath called the mind, and free that sheath called prana from stopping up. See, it must flow freely like water through a hose. When you step on the hose, it won't flow. So the nadis have to have a flow of prana going through them that's unimpeded, says the Upanishads. And the body then has to be seen as, if you will, as the temple of God. So in that way, then all of a sudden you've got your 5 sheaths aligned. You're making the march from lower truth to higher truth, and Maya then all of a sudden dissolves and takes a back seat. It moves to the back. Before, Brahman was at the back, your true nature, and Maya was at the forefront. Now all of a sudden, because of your spiritual practices, you're thinning out the elements in Maya. All of a sudden Brahma comes forth and Maya goes to the back. And that's marching from lower truth to higher truth, or refining the sheaths. And it would also play into here, your life decisions. Then all of a sudden your life decisions are, well, they're not even decisions anymore, they're just the will of the Lord. You don't even have to make them anymore. So that would be a past master, as we were talking about earlier. These past masters come out of wisdom, manifest in wisdom, live in wisdom, and pass away using wisdom to move back to their source. So none of that is really, oh, should I do this, should I do that kind of thing. It's, everything happens by thy own sweet will, O Mother. Shakale tomari icha maitar tumi, tomar karma tumi karma, loke bhave kare ami. A beautiful Bengali song which says, O Lord, O Mother, all happens by thy own sweet will. You are the self-willed one. All decisions, all work is accomplished by you. Others only call it their own. All work is accomplished by you. Others only call it their own. So when the ego becomes ripe, as one questioner was saying, then life decisions aren't really decisions anymore. They're just an open path. Everything just opens up to you. Knock and it shall be opened. And you have light. See? Let there be light. Knock and it shall be opened. Let there be light. That's the way of the wise. That's the path, of the sunlit path, Krishna calls it in the Gita. That's the way we want all of life to be. See? So maybe this refinement process has to arrive at such a place where we're not laboring anymore. It's all non-self-effort. Self-effort is important at a certain stage, but when you hear the teachings of the Dharma and digest them, then it should be strive in the spirit of non-doing, of non-self-effort. That's how Tibetan Buddhists put it in the Mahamudra teaching, for instance. And the next question is, what is the best way to cultivate bhakti in the early stages of spiritual life? That's what I was thinking would be the best question next, because that's one of the ways in which you're going to refine the ego mechanism. The Anandamaya Kosha is to cultivate bhakti. Now, in the early stages of spiritual life, bhakti quite often for many people is what leads them into spiritual life. I'd say that was the case with myself, that I just had a natural love for God, and I didn't know a lot in my young years about what God was. I didn't have a philosophical handle on it, which came to me later, which was within me, I'm sure, but it was bhakti that sort of was there as the underlying element in everything. So I think for most people, bhakti is already there in the quotient. That would be the easier path, the easier way to go by. But if jnana is there at first, that is lower knowledge, then that's going to mean you're going to have to go through a lot of rationale and practicalities and reasoning, and sometimes that can be very off-putting, the spiritual path. If you have that oil, then the machine runs right, you see. Sri Ramakrishna said, the mechanic comes every once in a while, adds oil to the machine, and it goes away, and the machine just runs on merrily without a hitch, you see. Well, he's talking about oil is bhakti, and the machine is the body-mind mechanism, soul. And if the mechanic, God, comes, or your own Atman comes and makes sure that the oil is topped off, like in a car, then the machine will run forever, practically, without any problems. So bhakti is that oil that you must inject into the whole system. It makes wisdom, and it makes meditation, and it makes action all flow better. Your mind is lighter. You're not worried. You're not brooding. You're not struggling. See, striving, yes, but striving is made easier too. So that's what I would say about bhakti in the early stages, whether it's there or not. Now, if it is there, then the question is, what is the best way to cultivate it? So I would think back to many of my experiences with holy beings, swamis and roshis and rinpoches in Buddhism and Zen and particularly in Vedanta with the swamis that I've met. They would always say, intensify your bhakti. Because people would come and say, oh, well, my life is fine now. Thank you for the Dharma teachings. Just great, you know. I've got a family, I've got money, I know how to spend it right. I don't have any bad karmas coming from my life decisions, you see, wrong life decisions. Everything is just flowing good. Now what do I do, you see? I would really like enlightenment, you see, but I'm sattvic right now. Everything is balanced. Everything is back in order, you see. Now intensify your bhakti. Intensify your devotion to God. Make yourself one with everything, see. As the Zen practitioner said to the hot dog vendor, make me one with everything, you see. So we want to be one with all five of those koshas. We want to know that those 5 koshas are self in 5 degrees, marching out in a pancha karna process. Karna means cause. And we want to know also how to retrace them or retract them. And then we have all the tools necessary at our beck and call to live a divine life. At least a dharmic life, a life full of wise decisions. Now that's worth working for. If it doesn't come right away, that is, if your decisions are still unclear and your bhakti, your devotion, is still minimal, then you want to cultivate bhakti, as they say. That means you want to intensify it. You'll find that if you intensify your love for God, that God takes over everything, because God is everything. All is Brahman, is the great saying in 3 words, one of the greatest mantras. Or sarvam kalvidam brahma, see, is how to put it in Sanskrit. So since that's the case, but you can't quite see it yet, by increasing your bhakti, then that is sort of like collyrium for your eyes, they say. See, add a drop of that in there and all of a sudden you see perfectly. So we're talking about this eye right now not seeing perfectly. Our consciousness not being able to get to that chakra, that lotus, see, because of the granthis or blocks or knots that are there in the lower centers. So that's putting it in Kundalini speak, of course. So then you're going to want to add a sort of collyrium to this eye, see, and that bhakti and that jnanam together, the 2 wings of the bird that check each other. You know, the bhakti that's not just sentimental and the jnanam that's not dry and intellectual. Fuse those 2 together and then you soar. And soaring is then meditation, dhyan yoga. So, and if you can soar and get dhyan yoga, you can come back and serve everyone as God. There's the 4 yogas right there, right? So get jnanam, bhakti, increase your bhakti, clear your mind with that, and then meditate, and then see God in everything and come back and serve it. That's a way of putting it that makes karma yoga the most important right now. It's fine to stay high in meditation in your own personal bliss, or have your own wisdom, or have a nice loving affair with God and everything. But what about all these suffering people around you? Suffering beings? All this ignorance that's prevalent? You have to come and remove the illusion of finitude from the minds of living beings. And how can you do that? That is, convince them of their infinite nature if you haven't realized it yourself. So the cultivation and intensification of bhakti is going to play a key role in that. You may read Narada's Bhakti Sutras, as you were saying just before class. Read Narada's Bhakti Sutras. He says, bhakti is its own fruit. That's one of the sutras. Shirataka, what are the fruits of bhakti? That's the wrong question. Bhakti is its own fruit. And really that's a beautiful sloka, because people don't know the sweetness of bhakti. They think, oh, love of God. That doesn't sound that exciting, you see. But once they start to practice bhakti yoga, cultivate it, intensify it, then there's no better quotient for I and my Father. Excuse me. There's no better quotient for I and my Father are one. It's that love that's going to fuse everything. It's going to bring everything close into a state of homogeneity. Everything's going to get attracted by that love, raga at first. It's the attracting power. It's a cosmic law called raga. It's the attracting power in everything. The mother loves the child and vice versa because of raga. See, iron filings run toward the magnet because of raga. On any level, scientific, physical, occult, intellectual, philosophical, raga is that power that's attracting everything to fuse together. See? It's what's keeping the atoms and the molecules and everything in a nice pattern. It's what's keeping chaos at bay and harmony as the underlying element of everything. Unity, see, is that cosmic power of raga, which comes from Divine Mother, comes from the Most High. So a little bit more time on that than I wanted to take, but nonetheless a very wonderful topic, how to cultivate bhakti. So what is the best way to cultivate bhakti? Just do it. And if you have it there in the early stages of your life, fine, then you can just build on it. If it's not there, then Sri Ramakrishna says, try yearning, try crying one tear for God, one tear of sincere love for God, and watch that burgeon into an ocean of tears of bliss, you see, weeping blissfully like Ramakrishna did for Mother Kali. Now, a student from Hungary, from Europe, asks, what is the difference between samskaras and prarabdha karma? What is the proper way of eliminating negative tendencies from the mind? By restriction or redirection? Well, taking this last portion first, you probably don't want to redirect negative samskaras. This would be sort of like snake bite poison in your arm. Well, I think I'll redirect it to my heart. You see, no, not going to work. You want to cinch it up there and keep that poison in the arm, you see, and then suck it out somehow. Wait for it. So you don't want to redirect negative samskaras. There are also mixed samskaras and there are positive samskaras. So you can redirect those, see, to a higher place. But negative samskaras, you want out of there. That poison you want out of your system. So he says, what is the difference between samskaras and prarabdha karma? Samskaras and prarabdha karma have a connection. Actually, the prarabdha karma is coming from your samskaras. So for those of us who want a little refresher course on these Sanskrit words, prarabdha karma is the karma that is already upon you. It's neither past karma proper, nor is it future karma. Future karma is yet to happen. You can change that. Past karma can be taken up and neutralized, and that's precisely what you're doing in this lifetime. The sanchita karma, called past karma, you've taken a chunk of that, hopefully a big chunk, or better yet, all of it, and you've brought it forward to this life to work it out. That's prarabdha karma. If you want it in a simple way, it's the arrow that's already left the bow. See, Ram has arrows in his scabbard. He has one he's taking out of the scabbard and placing into his bow, and he has an arrow he's already shot. Those are the three kinds of karma, metaphorically speaking. The one he's already shot is already loosed. There's no calling it back. It's going to hit its mark, whatever that mark may be. So that's your prarabdha karma. Without going into a long explanation of the beautiful teachings on karma, the three phases of karma and the three phases of time, just understand that the prarabdha karma is upon us now. And if your body really is that. Your body is your prarabdha karma. That's why if you look in a mirror or take a look at yourself and you see what the condition of your body is, that's going to be a good indication of what your karma, what is coming from the samskaras. Now, samskaras are of a past nature. That has to be said. Yes, you can create new samskaras. Hopefully you're not. Maybe better if you're creating positive samskaras, like samskaras of serving others, as we were just saying, samskaras of increasing your love for God, as we were just saying, samskaras of dissolving the mind stream, as we were just saying. Hopefully those samskaras you're engaged in. But these samskaras of the past that have caused you to take this body in ignorance, for instance, those you want neutralized. And you'll neutralize those mainly through meditation, through samadhi. Very hard to do any kind of neutralization of samskara, say, through action. Wisdom is a good way to take away samskaras of ignorance. Krishna says, Nahi gyanena sadrishyam pavitram iha vidyate in the Gita, that knowledge is the best purifier. So that would mean that these samskaras can be neutralized. Samskaras of ignorance can be neutralized by wisdom. So you have to cultivate those in this lifetime. If you see your prarabdha karma, then you want to offset it. You want to attenuate it. Maybe you want to outright disintegrate it, dissolve it completely, so that you too can be born free, you see, or never born at all. See, you're always in an eternal state. You don't have to march from lower knowledge to higher knowledge. You're there all the time. And if the body comes and goes, that's fine. Your eternal body is always present, because all other bodies are coming out of that, you see. As are all worlds and all beings. Everything is eternal. Everything is non-originated. There's no beginning, middle, and ending to anything. So with that beautiful piece of non-dual wisdom, you put all other problems like brooding and ignorance and fear out of the quotient. And you just begin to concentrate on realizing the self. What stands in the way of that are these samskaras. They're grooves run in the mind. The camel eats thorny bushes, even though its gums bleed. But it likes to taste so much it goes on eating. So that's our pleasures and pains, isn't it? We love our pleasures so much they might not be that good for us, like thorns. And we eat everything mixed with the blood of our own, from our own gums, as it were. All our enjoyments are mixed with this recurrent pain that comes back on us, you see. So we run an impression of our mind of pleasure, pain. And we can't, that's a groove that we can't get out of. The next lifetime we bring it forward. And that's why people are the way they are. There's no other way, psychologically, to explain life and karma without looking into the reincarnation theory. I would call it a relative truth, not a theory. You have to think outside the box. And unfortunately, Western science and Western psychology and so forth hasn't been for all these many years. We need to start doing that and connecting the dots, making these important connections. So, samskaras and prarabdha karma have that connection. That would be how I'd put it. The difference between them is the samskaras create the prarabdha karma. But if you live in the state of prarabdha karma and you start creating, you start falling victim to the prarabdha karma, that is, you're not working on dissolving it, then you can create more samskaras, sort of like the chicken and the egg quandary, you see, which came first. But anyway, that would be a explanation of the difference between them. The samskara is been run in your mind by certain actions, and that builds up karma. And then you take a bit of that karma and you're born with it, and you try and work it out. And hopefully, as you're working it out, you're not creating any more samskaras, no more impressions in the mind. You're leaving the mind free and clear of impressions, like a child. See, it's the Paramahamsas keep children around them just to remind them. That's their company, you see. They're childlike. Not childish, but childlike. Very pure. Seek thee for... thou shalt be like the little children, you see, if you want to get into the kingdom. In the remaining 5 minutes or so, I'll take this last question here, because we were just talking about fear and brooding and ignorance. The student says, in the book Dissolution of the Mind Stream, there is a wonderful description of asamvedana, which means non-receptivity to desire, and that was followed by this intriguing sentence. He's quoting my book, Dissolving the Mind Stream. He says, quote, to become invisible to one's own limitations is the unique way of the spiritual adept who is seeking dissolution of the mind stream. Becoming invisible to your own limitations. This sounds like an interesting dynamic, suggesting that we not only be aloof or non-receptive to our desires, but non-receptive to each mental projection of ignorance, such as brooding fear and doubt. Later you wrote, quote, "The soul will come to know that neither God nor devil is creating or destroying the worlds, but rather one's own mental projections, and that this projectionism has participants, ranging from the Trinity on down to the ancestors." Unquote. Can you comment on how these participants contribute to sankalpic projection, and how we become invisible to our own limitations? So he set up the question nicely with some quotes from that book, the new book from SRV, Dissolving the Mind Stream, which we've been bringing into a lot of the teachings lately. But just like these samskaras we were just speaking about, then we're talking about sankalpic projection. So there's samskaras in your mind. Your mind is a certain way, and you begin projecting things based on the flavor of your mind, the flavor of your samskaras. If you have a negative mind, the world you project will be negative, and vice versa. And also in between, mixed. Mixed samskaras will produce a mixed world. So you might not be able to make decisions very well, you see. Maya will be in everything because of mixed samskaras. You can't side with one or the other, you see, and neutralize any of them. So as far as the participants, then the idea is that, as I said in that sentence, God and devil did not create the universe. Number one, because there's no such thing as creation. There's only projection. You can't create something out of nothing. So you're actually bringing it forward with the mind. Now that mind has participants. You, your cohorts, and the Lord, Ishvara. Not Brahman, who doesn't have a mind, but Ishvara, God's mind. So you means your individual mind, and your cohorts mean ancestors, the rest of the human race, gods and goddesses, deities. Deity yoga, you see, is very big nowadays. Basically you have Upasana Dhyan, and you have Tattva Dhyan. Upasana Dhyan is worship of deities, deifying everything. And Tattva Dhyan is the study of wisdom principles. Those two things are very beautiful poles of this edifice of Vedanta. That is meditation and worship, or knowledge and wise action. See, you could put karma and jnana together, and meditation and devotion together. So therefore the participants there are falling more to the side of Upasana Dhyan. You're practicing deity yoga, so it means you're going to have to take into account the ancestors that have gone before you, preceded you, and are after you. And then are after you in two senses. Actually, they want to come back and become you again. That's how this cycle of rebirth is going on. They're after you. They want to come back and be your children again, have you for their mother and father, just like you were their mothers and fathers and grandfathers. So that's this cycle that Lord Buddha wanted off, this Kala Chakra. Ancestors of humans and back again. If it's lived in a dharmic way, no problem really, because you're not creating any karmas that are going to form some scars that bring you back in ignorance. But if not, and which is the case with a greater percentage of beings in this world, then there's problems. There's hell to pay, as we say. So, but beyond the ancestors are the celestials, and beyond the celestials are the gods and goddesses. These are all worlds within you, kingdoms of heaven within you. My Father's mansion has many chambers, however you want to put that, in whoever might say it. These great beings that have gotten the prana together and coursed inside with it to find these worlds and to have communion with these deities. There you have the participants in this projection. And it's all coming from the great mind of God, you see. So from the individual mind back to the collective mind, remember collective is humans, ancestors, celestials, and gods and goddesses, deities. You want to worship all this process. Upasana Dhyan. You want to worship it and meditate on it, or maybe meditate on it and worship it. And therefore you have the deification of everything. And all of that is within you. Om mano na buddhi na shariram indriyam tanmatram bhutani na bhuta panchakam aham kritas chapi viyat swarupakam tam isham atmanam upoiti shashvatam. Beautiful quote out of the Advaita Gita, which says, that one attains to the Supreme Self who dissolves the elements and the senses back into the subtle elements and the subtle senses in dream, dissolves those all back into the mind, dissolves the mind back into the intellect back into the ego, aham kritas chapi, and dissolves that back into the great self. That one attains to the Supreme Self who does this dissolution process. And you can do it in a few minutes. Probably want to practice it for a few years. But when you have it under wraps, you can see this all happening in involution and evolution, and not a second is passing. There is no time in it, you see. It's so fast that you can't see it happening. Just like you can't see the mind thinking. You have to slow the mind down to see how it's projecting everything. Because it's moving so fast, everyone, including intellectuals and scientists and doctors and lawyers and everyone except the seers and the yogis, buy into this fact that this is real, because the power that's projecting it is moving too swift to see. So we don't believe in projectionism. So I don't know if I answered the question, but I'm starting to get inspired about the dissolution of the mind stream practice. So join us this afternoon for our class, because that's what it's on, from 2:30 to 5:30 Hawaii time. This afternoon we'll give you another episode of the dissolving the mind stream practice, and also for the next 2 Sundays. So 3 Sundays in a row now we'll be taking that beautiful subject up and talking about not only the participants of this, but how we, through that process, escape our own limitations. That is, sort of bypass them, sidestep them. That's the part of the question I didn't quite get here. Asamvedana means becoming non-receptive or becoming invisible to your own limitations. After all, they are kanchukas. They are self-actuated limitations. You've taken them on yourself, whether through ignorance or through wisdom. You're taking on these sheaths or these limitations. So you need to give them up, and the best way to do that is consciously. So get a hold of those participants that can help you. Everyone around you in your Sangha, your Guru, and bring your family into it, and study the ancient wisdom from the cultures that are best versed in it, and then begin this inward journey that will destroy our limitations, that will ripen the ego, that will lead you from lower knowledge to higher knowledge, and that will take everyone, all the participants of the Sankalpa process, with you as you merge the self back into the great self, and the great self into Brahman. How's that for a summation? Let's end here with our lower truth to higher truth chant. Om Sato ma Sadgamaya Tamaso ma Joytir Gamoya Mrityor ma Amritam Gamoya Abira Bira Mayedi Rudrayate Dakshinamukam Tenamam Pahinicham Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Lead us from darkness to light, from lower truth to higher truth, from the unreal to the real, and from the illusion of death to eternal life. Reach us through and through, O Lord and Mother of the universe, with thy sweet and benign presence. Om peace, peace, peace. May peace be unto us, and may peace be unto all. Om Hari